Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is our training orientation for city commissions. I'm Gary Riedner. I'm the Moscow City Supervisor. So I've been given this training for probably the last 15 years. We do it about every other year. We posted on the website back in 2018, and I'm not sure very many people reviewed it. So we wanted to update it and provide some additional orientation, and we're going to start a process by which we publish out, put it on our website, put our materials on the website as well, so it'll be more of a living, breathing document and resource for our commission members. Mia Bautista, our city attorney, is here. We usually tag team this. I'll talk about the administrative side of it, and Mia will talk about the legal side of it as we move on. So we'll go ahead and get started. If I can find my clicker here. There we go. Okay, city commissions. You may have heard we just reorganized our city management. We had the city supervisor essentially supervise all the departments of the city as executive management. We changed that within the last 4 months, actually, and we've created 4 different groups. We've got the administration, finance, and public safety group. I head that, although I maintain city management over all the city operations. That is my particular, finance, we have police, fire, city attorney, those departments, and administration. Then we have culture, recreation, and employee services. That is Jen Piffner. She's now a deputy city supervisor, and she manages farmers market, arts, pathways, tree, and parks and recreation. Now that doesn't mean that she's going to be liaison to those different commissions, but she will be overseeing that group. They have community planning and design, which has the bulk of the city commissions. That used to be called community development. Bill Belknap is in charge of that. That department particularly, we merged both community development and engineering. So we're hoping to get more intertwined services and more informed services. So Board of Adjustment, Building Code Advisory, Fair and Affordable Housing, Historic Preservation, Planning and Zoning, and Transportation. Then we have Public Works and Services. Those are utilities and streets and fleet. So Tyler Palmer is the Deputy City Supervisor in charge of that group, and his group, he's got the Environmental Services group that is liaison to the Sustainable Environment Commission. So those are the city commissions that we have. By way of history, the Moscow Pathways Commission used to be the Paradise Path Task Force. About 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 now, it became a city commission. So a liaison was appointed, it was staffed, and so it's a permanent city commission at this time. So we'll move on and talk about some of the history of some of these. They're a little bit interesting. For instance, Transportation Commission was started almost 20 years ago, maybe a little over 20 years ago, meant to be similar to a metro area transportation commission. So you had representatives from road districts, state highway departments, city, all working together to try and plan out transportation needs for municipalities. So Sustainable Environment Commission also changes a little bit. It used to be that it was the Health and Environment Commission, now Sustainable Environment because of our focus on sustainability at the city. So going through these, we'll talk about those different types of commissions. So first thing we'll talk about is Quasi Judicial commissions. Steve is a member of the Board of Adjustment. Board of Adjustment is a pure quasi-judicial commission. What it means is that quasi-judicial commissions sit as a court. They don't take any information except that comes to them in a hearing. They look at written information, they interface with staff, They don't bring recommendations to the city council. Their job is to look at certain things like variances, land use adjustments, that sort of thing. Board of Adjustment is our pure quasi-judicial commission. They make no policy recommendations to city council. Planning and Zoning, on the other hand, has both quasi-judicial and advisory functions. It's one of the few commissions that is mandated by city code, or state code, the Local Land Use Planning Act. There are times when they will sit in their quasi-judicial capacity, and that typically happens if someone wants relief from a city regulation. They'll come in and make application to a quasi-judicial commission. They will hear it as a court does, presentations from both the applicant and the city to find out staff doing their research and that sort of thing. They also have another function. They're the commission that's in charge of developing our comprehensive planning document. They also deal with zoning issues. They make policy recommendations on building codes and land use codes. So they make recommendations as a commission as well. And then you've got your tree commission. Tree commission is very typically an advisory commission. It provides recommendations to city council. They have one quasi-judicial function, and that is if the city arborist, Dave Schott in this case is our current city arborist, if someone wants to take a public tree out or they wish to plant a tree, and first thing they do is they go to David and make application. In order to remove a public tree, you have off of the public right-of-way, excuse me, I got a little bit of a cold. You have to make application and get a permit to remove that tree. Sometimes people are aggrieved of the decision of the city arborist. They may want to take the tree down and the city arborist says there's nothing wrong with that tree, it's not diseased, it's a good tree. Then the person who doesn't like that decision of the city arborist can appeal that decision to the tree commission. Tree commission will sit in their quasi-judicial capacity. They will issue a decision. That decision may be to reverse the arborist, it may be to sustain the arborist. Whoever is aggrieved by that decision can then appeal that to the city council. And from then on, you can go up to court if you so desire. But those three commissions sit as quasi-judicial functions exclusively in the case of Board of Adjustment, but blended as far as P&Z and Tree Commission. They have no legislative authority. In fact, none of our commissions have legislative authority. They cannot pass legislation. They can give recommendations. The main thing to remember with quasi-judicial commissions is there's no public input outside of the public hearing process. That's very important, and as I tell city council when they sit in their quasi-judicial capacity, if someone talks to you about something that is before the commission, actually you're taking what they call ex parte communication, and that is something that's not allowed. So if someone tries to talk to you about something that's in front of your commission, what you should tell them is, if you talk to me about that, it will give me information outside of the hearing process. I will have to go ahead and publicly state that if I end up sitting. But if you tell me enough that it could sway my opinion, then I have to remove myself from the hearing. And if you're looking for my vote to positively vote on what you want, you don't want to take me out of the loop. And most of the time people don't even realize that and they'll quit talking to you. Okay, so those are quasi-judicial commissions. The other commissions that we have are advisory commissions. Advisory commissions are those that are set up to provide advice and recommendations to the city council. They have no, as I said, power to pass legislation. They have the power to look at things, make recommendations. We'll talk about the roles of staff liaison, council liaison, and those sorts of things. But it may be something that if city council, for instance, wants some information on a certain thing, they may send it to a commission and say, could you guys please take a look at that? Typically that's done through the staff liaison to the chairman of the commission. And if that happens, they'll talk about it and they will bring a recommendation back. Those recommendations then, typically in the form of, we think the city should do this, or we believe the city should pass this ordinance, or the city's policy should be this. They will bring that through. It will go to either the administrative committee of the city council or the Public Works Committee of the City Council. It'll be debated there and then kicked up to the City Council for final. Yes, we accept that recommendation. We accept it with modifications, so on and so forth. Or they may kick it back to the commission with direction. Say, okay, that's a great idea, but could you look at this aspect of it? Have you considered this? Commission would then do some more work on it and it would wend its way back to the council. Now, that's not the only way that a commission makes their recommendations. The commissions largely look at things that are within the scope of their mission as set out by city code, or it's brought up by the commission itself. And they'll talk about it, typically deal with staff, ask staff if they can provide information about it, so on and so forth, and then bring a recommendation through. I want to make sure that the commissions understand the council is not obligated to follow recommendations. Typically they will, but they act independently. One of the things with new council members that is awfully tough, and it happens most often in the realm of land use planning. P&Z may make a recommendation about something having to do with a plat or a subdivision or something like that. City council may not agree with every finding of P&Z. So if that happens, always tell P&Z, don't get offended by it. Everybody has their own responsibilities. So again, if council accepts it, doesn't accept it, accepts it in part, please understand that the council really appreciates the work the commissions do. Being a commissioner it's volunteer work. It's not, a lot of times you'd rather stay home and have dinner than come to one of these things, but we really appreciate the work that you do, and the work of our commission really helps us guide the city. So responsibility and structure. We've talked about policy recommendations, all except the Zoning Board of Adjustment. We've already talked about Quasi Judicial. And then we have structure. The membership of every commission is set by city ordinance. If you look in Title II of the, Title II of the City Code, it will tell you what commission is, what the makeup of the commission is, what the charge of the commission is. They'll have things like residency requirements. Under planning and zoning, for instance, there are residency requirements by the Local Land Use Planning Act. There are commissions that you merely have to be a county resident. They aren't regulatory commissions. They're looking for a broader range of feedback, perhaps. The Planning and Zoning Commission, for instance, because we have a area of city impact, one member of the Planning and Zoning Commission is charged with representation of that area of city impact around the city. So it sets out clearly what those responsibilities are. An interesting commission, and I've had a conversation with Dr. Kite, who's the current chair of the Transportation Commission. Some of these commissions have ex officio members. Transportation has a huge number of ex officio members. And the idea was that everybody who has an interest in transportation is invited to come in and sit with the commission. They can't vote, but they can be informed of what goes on. So it also talks about, the ordinance will talk about ex officio members. Attendance. Attendance to the commission is very important. You will see the mayor, city council, administration, my office will oftentimes say we need additional commissioners. The reason is because you have to have a quorum in order to conduct city business. And a quorum typically is at least 1/2 plus 1, or maybe even a supermajority to make a quorum. The only time a city commission can make a recommendation, in fact, the only time they should ever have a meeting is when they have a quorum. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about agendas. Michael, do you have a question? Let me give you a, this is being recorded, so I'll give you a microphone. Testing. I think that's on.
Let me just ask about the issue that you just brought up, and that's the ex officio members. And as you mentioned, we've had 2 discussions about this recently. We have, it's either 12 or 13 ex officio members, and I think that number initially, as you said, I think there was a good justification for that in the sense of this early vision of this being a regional transportation planning group. I think that's not turned out to be the direction the commission has gone. I'm just curious of what the experience of other commissions have been in initiating change to city code. Maybe this is a question for Mia, maybe for you, I don't know, but we're starting that process, and we'll probably have a recommendation this month or next, or this is February, March or April, to move along, assuming that other commission members
Well, I can field that.
agree.
I think the council is very willing to look at changing if there is a reason to do so. In fact, we got a request from the Human Rights Commission. One of the questions that the chair of Human Rights has had, Ken Fonts, is we would like our high school member, who's currently ex officio, we would like to have the high school member be a full voting member of the commission. When we started having high school members, the reason for not having them vote was to not put pressure on young people as they're sitting with all these adults to vote a certain way. Since that time, I think you've probably seen that young people have become much more outgoing, and they aren't about to be cowed into making a certain vote. So we're currently going to work to change those ordinances so they can become voting members of the commission. So I don't think anything is out of the realm of reason.
Any advice for us on the process as we go through?
No, I think talking about it, if the commission's will is to make changes, bring those forward, we can try to draft it. I'll try to provide some historic background of why we did this. Again, transportation, I think the reason for doing it's a great reason. If it works. If it doesn't work, maybe something else needs to be tried. So don't be afraid to bring ideas forward. And at that time, the process that we currently use now is we have a council and mayor leadership meeting once every 2 weeks, where the mayor, the council president, and the council vice president will meet with me, and we will they will give me direction. I will bring them issues that have been brought forward. Michael, we talked about the things that we talked about in our meeting. My meeting with Ken Fonts, I brought that up, and the direction was, hey, let's go ahead and try that. So I think there's always an opportunity to try, if there are positive changes that can be made, that we can do that. Can we give you the microphone here?
Need one?
No. Well,
thanks. I'm wondering, but each commission also has a director who is a city employee, is that
Yes.
correct? And a council
Yes.
representative.
we're going to get to that in just a minute.
Okay, I was wondering because I don't see it anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, it's I can't put everything in the agenda. We'll just leave this here, and if we have any other people who ask a question, pick it up, please. We're recording this so we can put it on the website. That's why you have to use it. Okay, so attendance, try to get there as much as you can so we can have that quorum. If, for instance, you have someone who, and typically what the liaison will say during orientation is, if a member can't make it, call the staff liaison and let them know I can't make it, or call the chair, can't make it, because if you have X amount of unexcused absences, then you may get a letter from the mayor saying, hey, we know things in people's lives change. Are you still committed to this commission? And people will either say, yeah, you know, I really don't have time to do it, or no, something was going on, I'm back. And if that doesn't pick up the attendance, they will get another letter from the mayor essentially saying, well, have to take you off the commission because we have to have a quorum and you're taking up a seat and it won't allow us to do our business. So happens very rarely. I would say a couple times every couple years. But attendance is extremely important. Participation and engagement, getting back to the situation with the high school students, get in there, get your nose into the discussion, and make sure your voices are heard. I know in the past there have been certain commissions that will be more passive, and they'll have 1 or 2 members or a chair that will lead discussions. I've even had situations in the remote past where I've had city council members who are liaisons to the commission who will actually try to lead the discussion. So you have to make your voices heard. It's like any other representative position. Leadership, every year the commission will elect a chairperson. So the chairperson will facilitate the meetings, they'll run the meetings. They're the main interface with staff. So the chair of P&Z will meet with Bill Belknap or Mike Ray out of the Community Development Department, or Michael meets with Bill on the Transportation Commission, so on and so forth. The chair of Parks and Rec will work with the Parks and Rec director, so on and so forth. And also, the chair can assign work to the commissioners. That's something that we've had different commissions. P&Z, for instance, has a long-standing tradition of outside reading. So it's always one of those things that these folks are volunteers. They're obviously interested. They want to do community service, but do they want to read a book that thick in order to stay up? Probably not. So staff will do what they can to provide information. Okay, City Council Liaison. I hope we get to your question on this one. Okay, City Council Liaison, every year, the first meeting in January, Council will split up the responsibilities of liaisoning with each of these commissions. There are different duties. I shouldn't say that. They're all the same duties. They're supposed to be providing that conduit to the City Council. So they'll come to your meetings, they will listen. It is not their role to take the meeting over. It's not their role to guide the commission. That is the commission's job. Their idea or their purpose is to be a sounding board. You know, you may ask them a question like, geez, how do you think the City Council would take this? And do you have any advice on how we could present this in a manner that might be more beneficial to our work? Council, those members the liaison can give advice about that. One thing to remember is they do not speak for the council as a whole. It is 6 people who are equals. So whether they're the council president or council vice president or a council member who doesn't have that leadership assignment, they can only speak for themselves personally. They can't speak for the entire council. So I've never had a council person do this, but if they say, oh, I'm sure the council will do that, take it for what it's worth. That is one person's opinion of what the council might do. It's like a singular member of your commission saying, well, I think, you know, the commission will vote this way. Well, that's a great guess, but typically you don't have that information. Every council meeting, there's a reports part where, at the end of the meeting, where these liaisons will report to the rest of the council and on TV, okay, what's going on? What's going on in this commission? Parks and Rec Commission talked about extending the hours at the pool, or Sustainable Environment Commission is working with Parks and Rec Department to monitor pesticides in the public parks, so on and so forth. They can also provide a background for council discussion on policy recommendations. So if there is a recommendation that comes out of a commission, the liaison, council liaison for that commission would be able to say, yeah, they talked about this, because there will be, you know, you get that document or you get the recommendation, there's always background behind it. Did they consider this? What about this? Did you look to other jurisdictions to see how they did it? Both the staff liaison and council liaison can help with that. Okay, getting on to staff liaison. A staff liaison assists the commission in accomplishing their mission. So they're acting as staff, if you will, for that commission. They do the ministerial functions, and by ministerial functions it means they put the agenda out. They make sure that the minutes are being taken. They will assist the chair, since they worked for the city, know the process. They will assist the chair in preparing agendas. Typically we have a staff member that takes minutes. Typically it's an administrative assistant or an administrative specialist. We have a couple of commissions that a commission member or the staff liaison might sketch minutes and then report those back to an administrative assistant who then issues those. And that's worked well in a couple of commissions. Historic preservation, I think, is one of those. But that's staff's responsibility. It used to be that commissions kept their own minutes. And if you've ever been the minute taker at a meeting, they always say that though the guy who sets the agenda and the person who takes the minutes control the meeting, But if you've ever taken minutes, you know that you don't get to participate very much. You're so busy writing stuff down, you're not participating. And the reason you're there is to participate. So we've tried to help that a little bit. And they'll also provide research or information. Transportation Commission is a great example. If there is a certain thing that Transportation wants to talk about, then it'll be the chair or the commission will say, could we get some more information on this? It may have to do with an intersection where there was a traffic study that some guy who's been here a long time like me can remember had been done, so you go back, try to dig that up and give the historical perspective. If there is national standards or any assistance in research that staff can do, they will do that as well. One of the things they will also do, if you have something that you want done, and it happens a lot in planning and zoning Board of Adjustment, the commission doesn't draft the documents. For instance, commission action on a quasi judicial matter pursuant to a public hearing. Staff will draft all of that information. They will draft whatever the commission wanted to do, and they will present that back for acceptance by the commission or amendment, and it'll be executed, and then that document goes up to City Council. So all of that is pretty invisible. City staff will handle that. Any questions about council liaison or staff liaison? Yeah, let me get you the microphone. Here you go.
Thank you. So my question is, I'm on the Pathways Commission, and we've noticed a lot of similarities or potential opportunities for collaboration between our commission and the Transportation Commission, but we currently don't have a great way to communicate with them or to collaborate with them. And so I'm wondering if that collaboration should be taking place between our city council liaisons or between the chairs, or if you have any recommendations for how we can better work together.
Yeah, I would say typically how that happens is you will have, for instance, Sustainable Environment Commission wanted to talk about curbing pesticide use. We used to go out and we used to spray public rights-of-way with chemicals. And that was always an iffy situation. Most people said, okay, whatever, keeps the weeds down. But certain folks said, I don't want you to spray the street in front of my house, so you could opt out of it. So they started looking at some different ways to do it, to take care of weeds. So then the discussion came over to, well, one of the main places that we'd like to monitor pesticides is in the parks. So Sustainable Environment reached out to Parks and Rec Commission, and even our street department and Parks and Recreation Department, and it eventually came with a joint initiative, if you will. And both of those departments, our street department started to use a hot water weed killer, and Parks and Rec is doing a pilot program on one of our parks for low or no pesticides. So it just depends. If there's something that crosses over to that, Pathways is a great example. Pathways are transportation, but they're also recreation. So technically there should be interfaces back and forth. One of the things that Michael was talking about a few moments ago about the ex officio members of the Transportation Commission, the chair, or excuse me, there is a designated seat for a representative of Planning and Zoning on the Transportation Commission. The idea is that certainly Transportation wants to have information about which way is the city growing. Is there anything on the horizon we ought to be concerned about? In preparation of the comprehensive plan, they have transportation sections. It makes sense for that liaison. So there are ways we could more formally do that. In a commission like yours, it's very much something that crosses boundaries.
So Gary, would it be the staff liaison then from the one commission that would then communicate with the other commission?
Typically, it would be the chair asking, or the commission asking the staff liaison if they could reach out and see if the other commission is interested in interfacing.
Yeah, exactly. With the Parks and Rec, you talk about sustainable environment, pathways, tree commission, they all have to do with parks.
Yep.
And one of our goals that we had last year was for all of our members to try to attend some of the other meetings at least once a year. And I did that with a couple, and I was absolutely amazed. Sometimes you had no idea what these people are doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we did, like you say, we reached out with pesticides, and hopefully that we'll all keep working together.
Good, makes good sense. Michael, you had a question?
So, Aaron, I'm really glad that you raised that, and I think there's now a member of Planning and Zoning who serves on Transportation Commission, and there's a way between that person being on a member of both that information gets passed back and forth. So whether we try to do it formally by having a formal member from Pathways, I think if I remember the list of ex officio members right, there's either the chair of the Tree Commission is an ex officio member of the Transportation Commission. It seems a little odd to me, but maybe as we look at these ex officio members, either to say that somebody from Pathways Commission should be ex officio, or in terms of strategic appointments when there's a vacancy to have somebody from. But it's also true that we should just get together and talk. So that's.
Yep.
Thanks for raising that issue.
Yeah, I heartily agree. Communication among commissions is encouraged, and if you have a chance, they're all public meetings, which we'll talk about in a few moments as well. Okay, Idaho Open Meetings Law. Mia?
Yeah, and to touch on that, I mean, there's nothing that preventing one commission to request to be placed on the agenda of another commission's meeting and then to talk about it in the open meeting. So a good segue to Idaho Code Title 74. Chapter 2 specifically talks about open meeting requirements. All commissions are subject to the open meeting law and is required to have every meeting open, right? The whole policy behind that is any formation of public policy is the public's business. We want to be transparent. We want to be clear as to what's driving our decision making, what's driving your recommendations to council. And so that all needs to be open to the public. Although you're required to have a quorum to make a decision, any meeting is a convening of 2 or more people. So you can still have a public meeting where it's required to be open to the public. If you don't have a quorum, you can still technically have the meeting, although Gary's recommended that you don't have the meeting, and then the meeting minutes would just indicate that there was no quorum, and so the meeting was then canceled. One of the meetings requirements for the open meeting is there has to be a notice 5 calendar days before the meeting. And part of that notice is the agenda also has to then be posted 48 hours beforehand. The agenda has to reflect what are action items, and so it technically has to say like action items so that the public is on notice what you all are specific to making decisions regarding. When you make the agenda, if there's something that you want to add to it and it's less than 40 were you making fun of me?
Not me.
If it's less than 48 hours to the time of the meeting provided, you can discuss it if you meet certain requirements. One of that is that you acted in good faith to make sure that it was included in the agenda during before the 48 hours.
Yeah, you have to have a action item that essentially says we need to accept this, and then the commission in this case would say, okay, why was this not included on the published agenda? Well, it wasn't because the person just made the request this morning and it's a very timely matter. So, and we couldn't get it on there. So that's a good faith reason not to have it on the agenda. Now, we don't encourage that because it gives us very little time to research. But then the committee or commission will be asked, do you want to include it on the agenda? If so, then you must find that it was a good faith reason, and then you vote to put it on the agenda. So you make a motion to amend the agenda to include that item. If that happens, then you can consider it as an agenda item.
Yep, thank you.
Sure.
Oftentimes at our Board of Adjustments meetings, someone can't make the meeting. They don't know 48 hours in advance. And so I've been told if we read the letter into the record, it's like that person being there. We have never actually made a motion and a second and approval to do that. Are we doing that wrong?
Are you talking about if someone sends a letter in support or in opposition of an
Correct.
item already on the agenda? Yeah, you can, it's usually up to the chair's discretion. I can't remember if it is, you need technically receipt of that letter, I believe, 5 days in advance, if I can remember right. But typically, we don't hold fast to that. The council has always said, we want to hear from the public. So if it's something that arrives that day, it's in the chair's discretion. If that's something that you want to bring before and read into the record, you can certainly do it. And you don't always have to read it either. You can make copies of it, have staff make copies, distribute it to the board. The board can then read it and then consider it. It would be included in the record of the proceedings at that time.
And so open truly means open. You have to make sure that the public is able to, one, that they know where the meeting is, two, that it's inviting, it's open, you don't have the door locked, the agenda is posted, and it's clear what you all are talking about and what the action items are. I mean, that's just, in sum, that's what you're required to do. In addition to making sure that minutes are being taken, and that the staff liaison or administrative support will take those minutes. And it's important for you then, I think at the beginning of every meeting, you're reviewing the minutes from before and deciding whether those are an accurate reflection of the meeting. So it is important to make sure that those minutes were taken correctly, and if they weren't, to make that correction at that following meeting. There are violations. If you do violate the open meeting law, there are civil penalties, and there are varying degrees of penalties. If there's a penalty you didn't mean to, but there was a violation, that's $250. If you knowingly violate the open public meeting law, it's $1,500. If you knowingly violate the public meeting law, open public meeting law, a second time within 12 months, then it's $2,500. There is a way to remedy that. So if you didn't intend to, you can remedy all of that by just having acknowledging that you violated the open meeting law. You then have basically the exact same meeting after you've posted it, you've posted the agenda, and you've followed all the requirements. Then you can have basically just a repeat of that same meeting. You would have to vote on all the action items, just like you did in the meeting before where there was that violation. So that is one way to remedy it.
So I haven't been fined, nor have I been arrested yet.
It would be a civil penalty. You likely would not be arrested.
City staff has in a nice way called me out for several mistakes I've made.
Okay.
But what I have tried to do, and I'm understanding this better now, is to encourage discussion, or let me say it a different way, encourage preparation of commission members before a commission meeting. And sometimes, as you say, there's staff reports that are somewhat technical and lengthy that need to be reviewed before. So what I've tried to do is, say, this is on the agenda for next time. Here are some key points. Please read through this carefully before, since we'll be discussing it and hopefully making a decision. I think a couple of times, or twice, that I've been slapped on the hands in a very nice way by city staff is when I've asked for some discussion beforehand via email and have been reminded, and I think it's been knocked into my head by now that I understand that. I admit to some frustration of understanding that process and trying to, oftentimes discussion, there's not as much discussion as I would like. And so I'm trying, this comes from a good place, I think, to poke people a little bit and say, look, here's some things to think about. So.
And we'll talk about the conduct of the role of the chair as well.
Yeah.
Today.
So I've found this kind of a challenging, narrow path for me to walk, but I think I'm learning.
Okay.
So.
And if you ever have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me.
So a question along those lines, because we've had quite a few meetings where we didn't have a quorum. Obviously, some issues get discussed during those meetings that may or may not necessarily be on the agenda. No meetings are recorded, nothing's filed, there's no official business occurring. Is that in violation at that point?
It depends. You're violating the agenda. I mean, you don't have a quorum, so you can't conduct official business. But you've got a group of people getting together to discuss the city's business. So technically that is a violation. It's been noticed, but it hasn't been noticed that you were going to talk about some of those subjects that didn't come up on the official agenda.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was quite kind of confusing. What he was saying is it's nice. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to be able to review this data and kind of like.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. It's a fine line.
Individually and only discuss it and do the decision making. Obviously, the decision making process makes sense, but I just didn't think if any background information and things like that could be brought up or even discussed.
Yeah. The technical legal jargon is if you are deliberating toward the city's business. So it can just be discussing it. Doesn't mean that you say, well, I'm going to vote that way when it comes up on the agenda or anything as obvious as that. It is getting together to talk about it.
Yeah, our idea was that only the actionable items would come under that purview. Is that not correct?
We'll talk in our agendas, we'll talk about areas, about reports. Used to be you'd have things called new business, old business. That's the old parliamentary procedure way of doing things. That's not the way the law is written now. Now action items, anything that you're going to take some action, and that action may very well be, we're going to ask staff to research that, right? So it can be a lot of different things. And we've chosen the safe way to do it, protecting hopefully our commission members as well, so you don't get those civil penalties, but to make sure that that business is done in the open. So we're very cautious about it. That's why it's my recommendation that if you don't have a quorum, the minutes just reflect that no quorum, no meeting was held, and then you're in the clear.
So who pays the fine? Every commissioner?
No, I don't know. We've never
We
had
haven't had that happen. I say we just
Hopefully, yeah.
identify it and remedy it as soon as we can.
So not to continue to press on this, but I think it's important. So what's the difference between council president and council vice president and you meeting to talk about upcoming agendas or policy? I mean, I think it's important that those kind of discussions take place, obviously. So where's that line?
Well, it's not a noticed meeting, okay? And there is not a quorum present. City council is a little bit different. It's very much related, but you will never see 4 city council members get together. They can get together socially and at a party or something, but you'll never see 4 city council members get together to talk about city business, because that is a clear violation of the open meeting law. In that case, you have the council president, the council vice president. We're talking about administrative stuff.
Right.
They're giving direction, but they're not voting on anything. The mayor, of course, has to meet with me to talk about things like that. So I admit it's confusing, but it's also something that as long as it isn't noticed as a public meeting, and then you essentially throw the public off and say we're not having a meeting, and then you have a meeting in fact.
Is there a number? Is it like if 2 of us were to get together over coffee and talk about not necessarily an agenda item that's up for discussion, but maybe something that's early stages of talking about a project idea?
You can definitely talk to other commissioners.
So a one-on-one type of discussion is fine.
Certainly.
Then.
I mean, nobody is, you go to the halls of Congress or down in Boise, you have legislators going to visit other legislators all the time. And that's to be expected. Now, quasi judicial commissions, totally verboten. You may not do that.
Yeah.
But for policymaking or recommendation commissions, you can do that. My recommendation would do just that, though. It would be one-on-one. If you want to talk to another commissioner, go talk to that other commissioner.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, that is to say, there is a thing called a serial meeting. And I'll get to your question in a minute, Amanda. Serial meetings, we'll talk about that a little more in communications. One of the things that if you're sending something out, say, please give me, I need to know what your position is on this, something like that. That's nothing but a meeting that's conducted by email, and it's not noticed. So serial meetings are totally prohibited. You cannot have a serial meeting. So you can do the same thing with a phone tree. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do, but you know, I've never had commissioners go out and actively try to sidestep the open meetings laws. Typically, it's all good faith. Yep. And you guys are laymen. If you're not employed by the city or by a governmental entity, we have different rules. I mean, in business, the door's always closed, right? You're always conducting your business behind closed doors. Public's totally different. And we'll talk about that a little more too. Amanda?
Just a point of...
Does she have the microphone?
Yeah.
Just a point of clarification, Mia and Gary, in regards to the open meeting laws and then the subcommittee line that's here. If you have a subcommittee that gets together, 2 or 3 people, it's under your quorum, do you still have to put together an agenda and say this subcommittee is meeting? Like, does that have to be noticed?
You need to, it should be done in the main meeting of the commission. If you're going to have a subcommittee, and that subcommittee should be made up only of commission members.
Right.
They can have their meeting and they can report back to the commission.
But they still have to, like, if I get together with the Farmers Market Commission and we have a subcommittee of the Craft and Food Jury, do we then need to put together an agenda for that subcommittee?
No,
Okay.
it's essentially task-based.
Got it.
You're putting together for a reason. They're going to jury food or they're going to do something, make a farm visit.
Right.
That's not technically a meeting. That is performing a task at the behest of the commission.
Right, and then they'll come, if there is something that comes up that says, hey, we really need to bring this back
Sure.
to the whole commission and make it an action item, then that would
Yeah.
be put forth to the chair to say, I'd like this on the agenda, so on and so forth. But I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly
Yes.
for subcommittees. Okay.
Correct me if I'm glossing over too much.
Yep, and just to go back to one of the other topics we were talking about, so if you're having a discussion with a commission member or a couple commission members, and it is not part of the open meeting, and then that, you can always, at the beginning of a meeting or when that topic comes up, you can say, so this person and I had a discussion, this is what we talked about. If you have any concerns, I mean, just make it part of the open meeting, bring it up in the open meeting. Yeah.
One of the things too, and as we get to the ethics in government, there's also clearly some conflict of interest issues. So if you have a conflict of interest, typically is some familial relationship or money. You're employed by an entity that could profit from a decision that the Zoning Board of Adjustment makes or something like that. You must declare that conflict. And you must on the record say that I don't believe that I have a conflict, or I have a conflict and I need to step down. Always ask the city attorney. The city attorney is, you also get civil penalties for that if you violate that. City attorney is your safe haven. If the city attorney gives you the okay, that I don't see that as a conflict, then you can go ahead and act on it and you're immune from that civil liability. If you don't ask and a conflict is later determined, then you could get held liable for the civil. So those are things to think about as well. But ask the questions. We're more than happy to help out with that. Okay, agenda and meetings. How are agendas prepped? Typically, agenda items originate some things like Zoning Board of Adjustment. They don't have anything to talk about except appeals and people applying to for different things under the code. So their agendas, they may not meet for a month or more if there's nothing for them to do. So they are reactionary to applications that are filed or appeals. Okay? In a Planning and zoning, for instance. Some of it is self-generating. If someone wants to move forward with a plat, they want to move forward with a subdivision, then P&Z has to take certain actions. So it's, again, situational based on somebody, an applicant doing something. Some of them come up regularly. P&Z, for instance, will every several years, they will go through the comprehensive plan and they will rewrite the comprehensive plan. So some things come up as a matter of course. There may be issues that council wants some direction on, so they may tell their staff liaison, they'll tell me, and then I'll tell the staff liaison, okay, this is something council would like to take a look at. Could you talk to your chair and see if you can get that in front of the commission? So that's typically how that happens. The chair then essentially approves the agenda. Staff will prepare the agenda. Typically all the stuff that needs to come before the commission because of an application or because it's that time of year, and we always do something that time of year, they will come forward, and typically the chair will go through that, say, yeah, that looks good to me. Really like to talk about this. So there may be a process for doing that. There may be a discussion about, who knows, the way street lights look. Bring it before the commission. The chair does not have the right to bring something or continue a discussion with the commission that the commission does not want to hear. You know, just like a mayor can throw whatever they want on the agenda. If the council doesn't want to talk about it, they're not going to talk about it. So it's really a collaborative process, and it takes an intuitive chair to be able to look at, okay, this is something we'd like to talk about. Do we have a consensus to move forward? And that's how a lot of commission stuff goes, is by consensus. You get a nodding of heads, yeah, we'd like to see that some more. So that's typically how that happens. It may be that the chair talks to the staff liaison, or staff liaison sees something that, you know, this is something I think we really need to head off. It's coming down the road. Small cell communications, 5G communications, one of those things that P&Z is wrestling with right now. It isn't like staff brought that to him and said, we got to deal with this. It's because the FCC says, you better have regulations in place according to this schedule. So it was like, okay, P&Z, deal with it. I think sustainable environment is being asked about that as well. So that's how that typically happens. The city clerk will publish those agendas. And when I say the city clerk, it's not Lori Hopkins, our city clerk. It's a deputy city clerk. It may be Ann from over at Community Development. It may be someone from Parks and Rec. So those deputy city clerks will act autonomously from the city clerk, but acting under the city clerk's authority. Meetings, you have regular meetings and special meetings. Regular meetings are, okay, city council meets on the first and third Mondays in council. City committees, admin and public works committee meet the second and fourth Mondays. That's a regular meeting. You essentially have a notice, if you will, that says, okay, this is what we regularly do. That's a regular meeting. We will have special meetings. Special meetings are if it's changed. You will see, for instance, we just had President's Day holiday. So we didn't meet on the the third Monday because it was a federal holiday. We met on the next Tuesday. That made it a special meeting. So there's not a lot of difference between them, except regular meetings. We try to stick to those as much as we can because people know that's when P&Z meets. That's when Parks and Rec Commission meets. And if you want to go see them, you can look on the website and it will tell you when those meetings are. Preparation of minutes, those are done by staff as well. Typically an administrative assistant or administrative specialist will keep those minutes. Those minutes then will come back to you as a commission to vote on. Once they're voted on, they become the official minutes of the commission. One thing we ask folks is, and you get new commission members and they'll look at the minutes and they'll say, hey, I talked about that and my name's nowhere in here. It may not be in there. Okay? Now you talk public hearings for zoning board of adjustment or quasi judicial hearings in front of P&Z. Yeah, you will see a lot more detail because you can appeal those to court and you can appeal them to city council. So they're more like a court document, a transcript. Typically minutes, what we always say upstairs is minutes should be specific enough so you know what the commission did, and 10 years from now somebody can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's what they did. Not Art said this, or Michael said that. That's not the purpose. Now, we've gone through times when that's been done, and they make for extremely boring reading, especially if you're trying to find out, get to the heart of the matter. Do you have the mic? Where's the microphone? Perfect, thank you.
So one of the first things we do at the meeting is approve the minutes from the previous meeting. So if anybody wants to change, they're welcome to talk about it then. The other question I have is, okay, the meetings are open to the public, and we usually start the meeting with open discussion meetings, not on, public for things not on the agenda. What if, like, right in the middle of the meeting, a half hour later, somebody bursts in and say, hey, I want to say something?
That is up to the discretion of the chair. The way we do it at City Council is we have public input, which we set aside in the interests of efficiency, set aside 15 minutes. The mayor gives anybody who wants to say anything on matters not on the agenda, because he will take public comment for action items on the agenda. That's something that's just been changed this year, by the way, but it is up to the discretion of the chair. And everybody, if they want to talk about things not on the agenda, not in front of P&Z, not in front of Zoning Board of Adjustment, then they can do that as well. So if someone comes in mid-meeting and they have a comment and the chair says, okay, sure, I'll give you 3 minutes or whatever is up to the chair's discretion to talk about that. I would say in those situations, if I had to give advice to a chair, it would be use that discretion sparingly, because you will really make angry commission members who you have your meeting set up a certain way. Somebody coming in and disrupting it is, some people think, is disrespectful. But if the chair wants to do it, the commission after the meeting will let them know whether or not they thought that was a good idea. But yeah, it's up to the discretion of the chair. Okay? Okay, open meetings. Commission meetings are open to the public, as Mia indicated. You're conducting the public business, transparent. We used to call them sunshine laws. Everybody heard of sunshine laws. Public's business should be done in the sunshine, not behind closed doors. Public comment during meetings, just talked about discretion. You can do that. You don't have to do that. I would encourage it if you can. It's a great way. The reason you guys were appointed to commissions is because you had an interest in the goings-on of the city, thought you could influence or help out. Members of the public want to do that as well. It's just they don't want to come to as many meetings as you guys do. So again, up to the discretion of the chair. Public notice of the meetings is required. 5 days notice and 48 hours notice on the agenda. And the whole idea with, and we're upgrading our website constantly, and the idea is to make sure that people know what's going to be on the agenda. If it interests them, they'll come. If they don't, they won't. Procedures, we use a modified Robert's Rules of Procedure. Any of you guys ever used Robert's Rules before? They are like hellish rules. They were developed for the U.S. Congress, and they're great. They can really move the public's business along. They can also be used to delay, obfuscate. You can have people filibuster. You've probably seen that on C-SPAN, where some senator or House member is talking to an empty gallery at 2:30 in the morning because he or she wants to avoid a vote on a certain matter. So you can use Robert's Rules. There are many ways to abuse them. So what we do is we use them for, we follow the basic stuff that somebody makes a motion, it typically requires a second, and then you have a vote on it. There are motions to suspend the rule of the day, orders to, or that wasn't correct, to lay matters on the table, which is essentially make it die. Amendments at commission level, even at council level, are pretty easy. And I don't know if any of you know Kay Keskinen. She's our local parliamentarian. She's a certified parliamentarian. She used to call me up all the time and say, last night you guys didn't do something that you should have done. Well, and she said, but you can always, if somebody, amendments are a great example, somebody wants to amend a motion, you can ask the quorum, ask the commissioners sitting there, okay, is there a consensus that we amend this? And that's okay. So there are simplified ways to do it. Robert's rules can be used both as a benefit and certainly as a weapon. So, yes, sir.
Thanks. So regarding the public comment, if you have a meeting scheduled, again, you don't get the quorum, and so you can't have an official meeting and capture minutes. What's the recommendation for the public who are there who want to contribute to the meeting? And I mean, do you have to just basically be real cold and say,
go home and come back?
Yeah, go home, because anything you say, I mean, you can't even really have them comment or discuss this with you, correct?
Yeah, and nothing's keeping them, as long as it's not quasi judicial, there's nothing keeping that person from talking to you personally. Not a problem there. Mia, do you have any other comments on that? Yeah, so again, even having a meeting when you don't have a quorum is still considered to be a meeting. It's just you can conduct no business.
Part of our meeting, like I said, that's why I was talking about the difference between action items and other things, is if we don't have a quorum, we usually don't handle the action items, but we'll still get the report from the tree commission, we'll still get the report from youth activities or something like that, so we're still allowed to listen to those. Is that correct?
In my opinion, you shouldn't be having the meeting at all.
Right.
And that includes reports. We'll get to a little bit in communication here in a minute, but there's so many things that can go on because, as our esteemed legal counsel will tell you, you are deliberating the public's business in a meeting setting that isn't an official meeting, okay? And I know it seems silly, we're just a bunch of citizens trying to get stuff done, but the rules are the rules. So, I don't think we'll go through this. This is pretty much process. We'll talk about minutes. Mia already talked about the notice for posting meetings. Staff will keep the minutes. Minutes will always be approved. Then they're scanned into a PDF format. They're put on the website, and once they're approved, they become the official documentation of the city. So the original minutes are kept in the city clerk's office, so you can always go back and check that. Okay, this is what our minutes typically look like. And one thing that Mia talked about before, which is a big change in the last 5 years, is you will see an action item on every item. Every item that isn't just a report, right? If it's a report, it's just a report. But if you're taking action, and that action can include, we would like staff to research this, we would like whatever, we'd like to appoint a subcommittee. That is action. So whenever there's an action, the public knows that, okay, the commission's going to do something here. You'll see here under the public comment, there's no action. There's no action because you're not doing anything with it. You're taking the public comment. So that's typically how you'll see the agendas now. Okay. Okay, communications. Every regular council meeting, the first council meeting of the month, we just happen to have 11 city commissions and the volunteer fire department. So the volunteer fire department will come in and they will give their report, and then every commission, that first council meeting of the month, will be invited in to give a report. So the only one that really doesn't is Zoning Board of Adjustment, because the stuff that they're doing they can't really talk about outside of the public hearing process. So these annual reports just recap who's on the commission, what the mission is, and then things that are going on. It's their chance to shine, share to the council what's going on, and to share to the public, because these council meetings are televised. Okay, written communications. If there is a written communication that is going to be sent out by a commission, it has to be authored by the commission chair, and it needs to go through the mayor's office. The reason that is because because they are city commissions, then they are appointed by the council. They need to be reviewed by the mayor, and there may be, we haven't had it, we've had a few situations where a commission may want to comment on something and it may be in contravention of what the council's direction is, or it may be on something the council has already acted upon. Then in order to not create confusion, that letter would not be sent. We've had situations in the remote past where we've had commissions write letters directly to state agencies. And if you don't think that isn't confusing, when a state agency gets a letter from the chairperson of a commission, the mayor's already sent a letter or the council sent a resolution, you know, whatever state agency it is looks at it and says, okay, what are we doing here? What does the city of Moscow really want? So that's why that happens. And there may be situations that a commission wants to send a letter when council's got it under consideration already. If that happens, what we'll do is invite the commission chair to come and talk to leadership, maybe meet with the mayor, that sort of thing. So that's why that, those authorizations go out. Addressing policy and stating the commission position. There are times when a commission will send something and it's clearly something the commission knows more about, and it's in their purview to do that. So send those up, we'll take a look at it. The mayor most of the time says that's fine, but if it is going to cause confusion or something like that, we will either send it back or we'll make some alternative arrangements. Okay, email communications. This is a constant burr. Since email became huge, we have public records law, as Mia will be happy to quote you chapter and verse. Anything that is, I mean, we were just talking about public records law today in my office. We have temporary records, semi-permanent records, and permanent records. You have to maintain these records and have to hold them for a certain amount of time. 2 years for temporary,
Yes.
and 5 years for semi-permanent, and then forever for permanent records. As you might guess, you're going to get stacks of paper. Every email communication that is done by a city commissioner, city council member, city staff regarding city business is a public record. So it has to be maintained. And so we got into a situation here, there was some question last fall about, we had an attorney who filed a public records request regarding certain things about zoning downtown and parties that wanted things rezoned. And it, first thing we asked was, okay, we can do a search on the city's email records. We can go through our written documentation, and that's fine. If it's on the city server, you cannot delete it off. I mean, even if you delete it, it's maintained for 2 years. Okay, so that was fine. We can do that. But this issue was also discussed at P&Z, and the broad nature of the request was any city commission that talked about this involving these parties. Well, city commissioners don't have city emails. So your email doesn't go through our server. If it's on our server, it's fine. So we got two choices. One is we make city email addresses for every commissioner, which is a huge task. Information systems cannot keep up on that. So what do? My recommendation is that you do not use email for city business, ever. Don't do that. Call on the telephone, come down and talk. If you do get something, then I would forward it to the staff liaison. If you do that, then it comes into the city server. Do not respond to it on your personal email. The reason is the city is responsible as custodian of those records. If it's in the city server, we're the custodian. If we've written it down, if we've filed it, we are the custodian. You are the custodian of your own computer. And what we will do, and we don't want to do this, and we would advise you not to use email, because all we can do is tell that attorney, we're not the custodians of our commission's emails, right? And so they could, and I had city council members about 12 years ago, Walter Steed and Wayne Krause. It had to do with some issue. It wasn't a huge issue, but they'd exchanged emails on their personal email. Well, all of a sudden, you need to turn those over to the city so that we can, because you're city council members. And it was a big mess. Turned out there wasn't anything on them, but I don't think any of us want some lawyer or a judge going through our personal emails. So again, my recommendation is don't do it.
Gary, that's not limited to just emails, everybody. It's also text
Text.
messages. It's any form of written communication. That's text messages, emails, letters, writing on
Notes.
sticky notes. I mean, it's truly any form of communication, written communication. That's a record.
But we always get the email saying, here's the meeting, here's the agenda. And I remember that because I can't remember exactly when it was, but I got this email
Yes?
Yep.
asking for my emails. And
Yep.
I said,
Don't have any.
my server's WSU.
Yeah.
You know, you want to go ask them, that's fine.
And that's exactly right. That's what I said. If you get something, if you get it from the city, don't worry, it's already on our server. And if you don't respond to it, all we've got is what was sent out, right? If you get something from somebody and you forward it to the staff liaison, do not answer where it came from, forward it to the staff liaison, then it's on our server. Staff liaison will then look it over, probably consult with the city attorney, and determine, okay, what action do we take on this?
And that's what I said. I said, anything that I have sent to Parks and Rec is on your server, even
Yep.
though it came from WSU.
Yep. And it should always be, in making those responses, is that I don't have anything except that. I never engaged in communications with anybody else. Remember, you want to have a good faith reason, a good faith, I didn't do that, right? And that's very powerful. What you don't want to have is have these sidebar conversations with people, and then there's a public records filing. Somebody knows that you had that conversation with them or somebody else, and they dig through your emails and find it. That is not a good thing to have happen. So, seems inconvenient, but we are just not able to give everybody email addresses, and frankly, I don't even know how you'd manage it, right? We talked about serial meetings. These emails with multiple people at the head, that address to multiple people, that can be a serial meeting, especially if you're saying, let me know what you think about this, or whatever. Michael's good faith, just trying to get some business done, saying, give me feedback or giving guidance, becomes one of those verboten things to do, right? So the main thing is, and if you had, if a chair wanted to, they could talk to their staff liaison and say, I'd really like the commission to do this. If it comes from the staff liaison, official city email, not a problem, and that staff member knows that they're not supposed to say, let's start this discussion back and forth about it. This is information, it's going to come up on Wednesday. We'd like you to be as prepared as possible. Yes?
So if I send out an email to commission members before a meeting saying, issue X is on the agenda, please consider these questions and not ask for feedback, I always copy Bill. Bill's always copied, so city staff is always on this. Is that action then, you would recommend not to do that, or that's okay? I mean, I'm not asking for feedback, I'm just saying, think about these things.
I would recommend
Still,
not doing it.
Okay.
Because again, if it's generated from the city, I would suggest just building that rapport with your staff liaison. And I mean, there's no reason not to do it, right? And frankly, it's not burdensome to them to do that. So I would have the staff liaison do it.
So if the email comes from Bill saying the same things that I just said, then you're fine with that?
I'm okay with it because it's a city staff member and they are versed in how to avoid that trap or any potential trap.
And
so,
Bill is terrific to work
Sure.
with. He's slapped my hands a bunch of times. He's helpful to me, provides information.
Perfect.
He's great. So,
yeah,
okay.
I just utilize that tool. Amanda?
Just another point of clarification. Sometimes I think we have vendor representatives for the Farmers Market Commission, and sometimes vendors feel comfortable talking to other vendors. If a vendor rep said, hey, it's market day, can you send me your thoughts in an email and I will be happy to forward it on to Amanda, is that appropriate?
I would say no.
Okay.
I mean, your email is listed on the city's website.
Sure.
I would encourage that vendor to communicate with you directly.
Okay, and that would be the direction for those vendor representatives.
Yep.
Is like, we can have this discussion, you and I, but if you really like, you know, I would suggest you send your thoughts along to Amanda in an email so it's on the record.
You
That
bet.
would be-
And I've had, and the vendor representative is chosen from the class of vendors. They're meant to communicate with people about that. And when I was doing some work with the Farmers Market Commission, you'd see stuff scrawled on napkins and receipts and, you know, talking to somebody at their booth. And that's all fine. But again, technically that is a public record. Yeah. That would be the way we would prefer. We're not trying to make this so antiseptic that it seems like we're dealing with national security here. We just want to make sure that nobody has to pay a civil fine and the public is reassured that the business that's being done is being done according to the law. Okay, we talked about information sharing, interaction with other commissions, so I hope I answered that question and we can try and foster that a little more. Okay, don't need that. Okay, Mia, I'll let you finish up with this.
Okay, so if you have any questions, call me. We talked about open meetings, we talked about public records. All public record requests in some form or fashion does funnel through my office to do kind of a final sign off. And so that large public records requests, I did review thousands and thousands of emails as part of that to make sure that all those records actually complied with the request and we were providing what we're required to provide. The resources here, the Idaho Public Records Law, you can access that online. That's Title 74, Chapter 1. The Attorney General's Office also has a manual for public records, open meetings, ethics in government. You can access that online. It's very thorough, well laid out, easy to read. Just to highlight a few things, ethics in government, conflicts of interest. Gary touched on that. If you have any concern as to whether, if you have any interest in a decision that's before you, that's probably a conflict. And you should disclose that you have a conflict and excuse yourself from voting. You could still deliberate, just not vote, but you do have to make your conflict known. If you're not sure if you have a conflict, please come to me and ask me. And then you have the protection of the city attorney's advice as to whether you have a conflict or not. Public Integrity and Elections Act is fairly new. And so basically, we cannot use public resources, public funds to advocate for or against anything that would be on a ballot measure. And
a great example of that was our GO bond that got passed on May 19th for the new police station. You saw a bunch of information out there. That information, we provided information only. Anything that you saw that said vote yes on the bond, that was done by advocacy group, a private advocacy group that came forward and used donated funds to do that. So we didn't use any public money for that.
yeah, you still have your own First Amendment right. You still can have your opinion. You just can't act on behalf of the commission or you as a commission member and try to speak on behalf of the commission advocating for or against a certain ballot measure. And we do have the Public Service and Public Meeting Handbook available on our website if you have any questions. We went through a lot of information. I mean, really, when you just look at the big picture, and I know Gary's repeated this a couple times, you know, we just want to make sure we're transparent. We want to make sure all of this goes back to transparency. We want the public to know, you know, how we're making decisions, why we're making the decisions we're making, be a part of the process of how we're deliberating and all of that. It really comes back to that. We really want to be transparent, open, and make sure that people understand why we're making the decisions that we're making, or why you're making the recommendations you're making.
Okay. Do we have any questions? That ends our somewhat dry presentation, but any other questions that we didn't answer tonight? Okay.
Okay. So my understanding from the question that I asked earlier and everything that I've heard is that it would be appropriate for us to approach the Transportation Commission and ask for a liaison position with them, because that's something that is happening.
Now again, you get to the situation where you can't form a liaison without, it's got to change, the ordinance has to change. Okay, if you want to create an ex officio position, that's what Michael and I were talking about the other day. That doesn't prevent you, as a member of the Pathways Commission, to go sit in on that. Nothing preventing the chair to saying, hey, I see we have a guest here today from the Pathways Commission. Do you have any feedback from the Pathways Commission? So you can do that as well. More informal. Again, the more specific you make laws, you have to follow those specificities. So we prefer the informal if you can do it and if you believe your voice is being heard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Amanda.
A follow-up question to Erin's request. Could Transportation and Pathways form like a joint subcommittee, and then they're each reporting out to their commissions?
You know, that is something that we've talked about. We've had certain commissions go out and want to get a member from all the other commissions. What that does is essentially form another commission.
Sure.
And we've wrestled with that, how to do that. I'm not prepared to comment on that right now because we haven't discussed it to the point of how we could make it work, because that may require notices and everything else. It's not a subcommittee, a task-based subcommittee.
But if the two chairs wanted to get together for coffee and just say like, okay, we're going to take this back to our respective commissions.
Sure, absolutely, having those discussions.
But as far as that joint subcommittee, that's kind of, okay, got it.
Any other questions? Okay, I just want to reiterate once again, and it's not just hot air, we really appreciate the work that you guys do. You know, I've been coming to city council meetings most of my adult life, and you know, I know there are times when I don't want to be at that meeting. I'd much rather be home watching Monday Night Football or some of the other things that guys my age like to do, but you go out and you do it out of a sense of being a servant to your community. And that's something that, you know, there are a lot of people who go through, they live in the community, they take advantage of the good work that you folks do. And I've always said the best government is government that you don't even notice. And you're very important to us, to the community. It's like, well, city's running well, and there's a lot of support that we get from you guys doing that. So again, thank you very much for doing that. And you will see in the next couple of weeks, we are even giving you this very nice mug. Every commissioner will go around to all the commissions, and we just said, God, you know, we really ought to do something tangible. I know the mayor brings popcorn and cookies at Christmas time, but we decided that we wanted to do something nice for you. So my clerk upstairs was afraid that if I handed these out tonight, some of you unscrupulous people might take 2 of them when they come to the said, I really doubt it's not going to be that hot of a commodity. But anyway, again, thank you very much for taking part of your Tuesday night and spending it with us.
And is this presentation going to be somewhere where?
Yes, we will send it out, and there will be notice. The liaisons will do it, and any new commissioner will get a letter that says this is where you get the commission training. Okay? Again, thank you very much.